Thanks, Allie. And thanks to all of you for joining in today. And we'll just have a brief discussion, I guess, over the next 20 to 30 minutes about design intent and what that actually means. As Allie mentioned, feel free to ask questions. Just use the Q&A box, and we'll do our best to address those. So the title of the presentation is simply, What is Design Intent? And then I tagged onto that, Does anybody know? And I think the term design, or the terminology design intent, is somewhat vague. And I think in terms of civil engineering, in terms of designing and the things that we've done over the years, we sort of know what design intent is. We sort of understand that design intent is the intention that we build into our designs via plan sets, via notes, via drawings, and all the things that we produce. It is our intent for the design and the construction of a project, right? It is my intended design for this roadway, this intersection, this parking lot, this pad, this whatever it may be, right? That's kind of what we do. I sort of, let me bounce where I'm trying to go. I sort of thought about this earlier and kind of realized, you know, we are in the business of communicating, documenting, and conveying design intent. That's what we do as engineers and as designers. All of the sets of plans that we have created and continue to create convey and inform someone else of the intended design. So as we ask ourselves, what is design intent? If we look at a set of plans, any set of drawings that we could take a look at for a typical section here, for example. So as we zoom in and we take a look at this typical section, it is conveying design intent. And it's conveying design intent really a couple of ways. One is that it is conveying our intent for this particular cross-section or typical section of this roadway. It's conveying it in a relational way. It's basically telling us, hey, this edge of pavement is going to be 30 feet from this center line. That's the relationship horizontally that we need to maintain from the center line of this roadway. And at the same time, it's also defining positional definition. If we zoom out, let me scroll down here, bear with me. We'll move down. If we look at another, any typical drawing within a plan set, we look at a plan and profile, let's zoom in here. It's also defining, again, locational or positional definition. For example, here we just got a simple call out, station, and offset of that particular right-of-way point. Again, when a lot of this information, when we place it in our plans and how we define elements and the way we do things, it's all about position and it's all about relation. You want me to build what, where, in my simplistic terminology. So when we think about design intent in the form of the plans and the form of the way we've conveyed it in the past, it does sort of come down to relational awareness and rules that define where something is and how it interacts with other elements. Now, what does that have to do with OpenRoads Designer? Well, OpenRoads Designer takes that thought process and really that fundamental concept of everything that we do when it comes to defining our projects and setting the scope, and again, defining that intent for each and every design. It takes that type of mentality and places it within the software. And it gives us the ability to define elements and build rules and relationships directly into our elements as we design. So as we create graphical elements with an offset of 12 feet or 24 feet, or we create a radius of an element of 150 feet, it remembers what it was and how you created it. Now the impact of that has some distinct implications. So what does it matter, or why should I care, that elements within my design model remember how they were created? Well, there's a couple of things to note. And here's just an overall example. So within OpenRoads Designer, and you may have seen these types of demonstrations before, I've got here's a basic T intersection with a little short stub out of a roadway. Now, in OpenRoads Designer, I'm certain you have seen before, as we move elements around, you'll notice that the model, the graphics, all of the interconnected elements move with it. So as I need to just modify that intersection, and I slide it up along the mainline corridor, you'll note that everything's going to move and change with it. Now, simply being able to do that is a result of rules and relationships, of OpenRoads Designer remembering how I created the horizontal alignment for this secondary road. It remembers, of course, what roadway template was applied to it. It would remember how the vertical alignment has been created. So, for example, if I open up the profile of this secondary road, and bear with me while I rearrange the views just a little bit here. Now, these are the subtle details that we all are concerned about. You know, everything, the devil's in the details. And so, for example, it's one thing to just, you know, move this intersection up or down, but I need to be aware. I need to know that my intent is maintained when I make modifications in my design. And that fundamentally is the benefit of having, quote, design intent, or capturing and storing rules and relationships all the way through your design process, which OpenRoads Designer provides you, is that you can be confident, you can know that I created it this way, it's going to maintain that relationship, it's going to maintain that until I change it, even when I jiggle something to the left or the right or, you know, north or south of it. So in this example, again, you know, I moved that road, we saw the model update, but you may ask yourself, well, wait a minute, there's some details to that. Wait, what happened to the vertical? How did the profile know what to do? How did it know how to maintain a certain slope or a certain cross slope, or how did it tie into the roadway? So first of all, as you talk about design intent, every element in OpenRoads, as you create it through the OpenRoads tools, has some form of design intent. Now that design intent could be a slope, 2.26%. It could be a horizontal distance. It could be a direction, you know, north 45 degrees east, whatever. It could be a snap. It could be that I have singularly and definitively snapped the end of this line to this point, and it remembers that, okay? But in this example, notice what happens in the profile view as I just grab the horizontal, and let me just move it along the roadway and stop for a second. So when we look at the details, specifically the profile details of this, you'll notice that that profile has a defined relationship to, number one, the mainline corridor and the cross slope of the mainline corridor. Notice how as I move that along the main line, that profile knows to match the cross slope of the roadway. Okay? And that is fundamentally what design intent gives us, and the ability to do that. Okay? So in a nutshell, or at least a straightforward, sort of simplistic, direct example, this is what, move that down, let's pull that up there. That is the benefit and the advantage when we say design intent. What we are fundamentally meaning is that I have designed horizontal, vertical, three-dimensional, all of my elements within my OpenRoads model have been defined with rules and relationships, so that those elements, as I make modifications, those rules and relationships are maintained. All right, so let's take a look. There's a few other questions. If this is what design intent is, how do I implement it? What really is going on there? So bear with me. Let me change drawings here. Now, what I want to do first of all is to just give you kind of a quick comparison to, you know, the way we have traditionally done things, and compare that to taking advantage of OpenRoads rules-based geometry. Now, this is a bit of a strange drawing, I'll admit that. On the left-hand side, you know, we have nothing but just some graphics. These are simply lines placed using our drawing tools. And you'll notice they have no really information on them other than a beginning and an end point. So as an example, there is a distinct difference between OpenRoads geometry and just graphics placed in a file. So as a quick example, if I want to just place a line, and we'll do something very simple, and you probably have all seen this if you joined in the other presentations here. I can turn on, I'll do a perpendicular snap, and just place a line. Okay? And I can do the same, let's just do the same over here. Right? Now, we have that line. It's there. It was placed perpendicularly to this arc. But now what happens when that arc is modified? Nothing. That line that I placed has no relationship to that arc other than what I defined it when I placed it at that moment. It has no legitimate ability to update. And that's what design intent is intended. It is intended to define and give you a mechanism so that it has, all updates have a legitimate and a definable and a precise way that they update. So let's look at this other example. And this is geometry created using the OpenRoads geometry tools. So we have the same drawing, the same graphical elements over here on the right-hand side. You notice as I select that element, it is defined. There's a radius on it. There's a bearing, a distance. You know, the geometry is defined. So you could define this as line work on the left, geometry on the right. And the geometry on the right has rules and relationships to it. Now, as I select that horizontal element, you notice a couple of things. We see the bearing, we see the distance. You'll also see this little glyph here, noting that that element was created with a tangential definition to that arc. And the same is true of all these other elements. There was a relational definition built into those elements when they were created. Now, what's the advantage of that? The advantage of that is, very simply, then, if I make a modification, notice what happens to those graphics. So as I make modifications to any of those elements, those relationships are maintained. You'll notice if I click on it, it's still tangent to the arc. This element's still perpendicular to the arc. And this element still maintains a 200-foot offset from that intersection point. And that, again, that's the advantage, and that's fundamentally what design intent and rules and relational geometry in OpenRoads Designer is all about. It's to give you control as a designer to know that I made a change, I created it this way, it remembered how I created it, and I can maintain those relationships. All right? Now, so that's kind of the difference between line work versus geometry. Now, I'm going to take this a step farther here and just kind of evolve a little bit. Now, the benefit, too, of having design intent is clearly seen graphically. It's easy to see that if I move this around, I see the line work update and the lines change. Okay? Imagine now we take that a step farther and we think about drawing and modeling. So the geometry, an intelligent geometry, which is the basis or the foundation from which we're going to model, if that's intelligent and it's relational and rules-based, that makes our modeling and making changes and designing within a model much more effective, right? So ultimately, the geometry, horizontally and vertically, and the relational interaction of that data makes modeling, the way we dynamically model and change and update things with OpenRoads Designer, that's fundamentally how it knows how to make those changes. All right, so a couple of points I wanted to make as well. Let me change back here so we can, I kind of give you a couple of points I want to make. Now, we talked about, and I want to expand our definition of rules and relationships here a little bit. Inside of OpenRoads Designer, rules and relationships are captured and maintained throughout OpenRoads Designer. Now, we're looking at geometry at this point, but the same is true in the horizontal geometry, with vertical geometry. The same could be true that your design intent is captured and conveyed in a roadway template with the cross slopes that you define, the depth of the ditch that you define, the elevation where you go to a 2-to-1 slope when the fill's elevation's too high. All of that is design intent, and it all really combines and intersects within an OpenRoads Designer model to, again, give you interactive, the dynamic modeling that we see. Now, rules and relationships. How can rules and relationships be created and stored when it comes to creating my design model and my geometry or anything else in OpenRoads Designer? Well, you can see graphically here on the screen when we use the geometry commands in OpenRoads Designer, we will be creating rules and relationships on elements as we create them. So the first method for imparting rules or relationships into your OpenRoads design is simply using OpenRoads tools. And we'll take a look at that in just a second. But I boiled this down to three main ways that rules and relationships are created when it comes to OpenRoads Designer. The first is, again, just simply using an OpenRoads tool. Placing an arc between elements, that rules and defines that arc between those two known elements. So where those two elements on either end, the two tangents on either side of the arc go, well, that arc knows to follow. It's a child of a couple of parents, and whatever they do, it's going to adjust automatically. So we use OpenRoads tools to build relationships, and we can use snaps, just simple microstation snaps like an intersection snap, a near point snap, or an endpoint snap. Those impart relationships and rules as well to elements as we create them. Also, Civil AccuDraw. Civil AccuDraw can be used to define positional and relational definition or awareness of elements when we create them. Okay? So let's go back to our example here and take a look at what that actually means. Nope, I don't want to change. Sorry about that. But bear with me here. We're going to change here. All right. So let's go through a couple of these exercises. As I mentioned, three main ways to define some type of design intent. So let's kind of take a look at this. So if we go back again, we take a look at just something straightforward, something simple like our intersection. What I want to do is I'm going to go to the OpenRoads modeling tools, and I'm just going to place some geometry, and quickly give me put a definition on it. Now I'm thinking in my brain, how do I want this center line of the secondary road to interact with my main line? And again, a very simple example is I want that to be perpendicular to the main line. And now I'm just using a simple perpendicular, quote, microstation snap, and I'm going to place that. So there is my center line of my secondary road. And you note, just by highlighting it, I can see that it has a relationship to maintain a perpendicular relationship to that alignment. So let's test that out. Let's see if that's true. So we pull it up and we move around the arc, and we can verify. It is remembering that it's supposed to be perpendicular to that baseline. So that's great. It remembers. That's what we wanted. Let's pull it back over here. And let's sort of continue on and think through this a little bit. So, number one, we built a very simple alignment. We have imparted our design intent in that we want it to maintain a perpendicular 90-degree angle to the baseline. And now let's continue on. Let's look at some other things that we might want to do. If we go up to the horizontal geometry tools, maybe we just want to lay out again a simple left and right edge of pavement. So I'm going to just, again, I'm using just the OpenRoads tools here. And let's note what happens. So I'm just going to do a single offset along the entire length of the alignment. I can pick that. We can make the offset whatever we want it to be. I think this file is actually metric, so we'll leave it there. All right, so I'm building a relationship to that main line alignment of 6 meters. Right, and then I'm going to mirror it, so I'll do the other side as well. All right, so here's the key. Notice what happens when I select that element. That element now has been imparted or has been given a relationship to the main line. So as we create elements in OpenRoads Designer, we're not just creating graphics. Our decisions aren't lost the moment we make them and place the element and walk away and move to something else. Our decisions are maintained, which, again, if you take the long-term view of what we are doing as we design in OpenRoads Designer, we are actually increasing the value of the data that we create. So those edges of pavement now aren't going to be wasted if I need to make a modification to my center line. That effort's not been wasted. Okay? It's all about being efficient. It's all about making design decisions, capturing those so that I can reuse them over and over and over again. All right? So we are making or increasing the value of our work and minimizing the rework and increasing the efficiency down long term. All right, so 30 minutes just isn't what it used to be. So we have used a microstation snap just to simply build a perpendicular relationship, okay? And here's the key thing I want you to take away out of this presentation. I want you to understand that in OpenRoads Designer, first of all, that we are, again, enhancing the value of your work, and we're giving you the mechanism to maintain the value of it. Again, if this had just been graphics and I needed to move the intersection, we all know what would have happened. We would have had to recreate every edge of pavement. Now take this a step farther and let's just let's put an arc in here. So we'll do an arc between elements. Oh, let's do this. Let's do a taper, and I'm just going to put it in here kind of quickly. We'll go here, and now we have that information. We're placing it, and I'll just click. We'll trim both elements and let that process. So we just, made another design decision, and now we have put that in our design. We do the same on the other side. Again, I'm just kind of doing this quickly, just for example. Click through the prompts, and so now we have, it's not maybe exactly what we were shooting for, but now we have our intersection. And again, this has been defined with rules and relationships between all these elements. So again, on Tuesday I created these graphics, and then on Thursday, for whatever reason, we need to make a modification. What would happen in the past? We all know what would happen. We would have to recreate all those elements. Now, again, time is kind of moving here. All those elements are modifiable. Remember, I put a taper and an arc and a taper in. So you even have you have the ability to modify these things after placement. So if you need to make changes to any of those elements, you can do that directly. And again, the key is to maintain the value of the effort that you've already put in when you're creating, not just graphics, okay? Let's take this one step farther and look at, again, the long-term view. Ultimately, with OpenRoads Designer, it is about modeling. It's about creating three-dimensional design models. So we're looking generally at geometry, which is kind of the foundation that we all work from. This is the foundation from which our 3D data is going to be built. But if we take this a step farther and we begin to build a corridor on it, or we apply a linear template to it, those are being built in a relationship to each of these individual elements. Okay? So as those elements move, the pavement, the curb gutter, the sidewalks, all the other elements move with it, just as we saw in the first example. Okay? All right, as I said before, if you've got questions, please just use the Q&A box, and we'll do our best to answer those. So, the takeaways. Number one, what is design intent? And what is design intent in OpenRoads Designer? Fundamentally, and at a very basic level, it is basically capturing the rules and the relationships that you create as you build geometry, and maintaining that throughout the design process. Okay? That fundamentally is what design intent is. You could replace the term design intent with just simply saying it's ruled and relational geometry. That's what we're talking about in OpenRoads Designer. Now, it's not just geometry, it is throughout the product. And I didn't quite have time to show this, but if you snap or you want to interact with other elements, well, we did actually. If we go back and look at our first model, let's go here. If we go back and look at that first model, remember, it's not just horizontal geometry or vertical geometry. The rules and the relationships are the interaction of all of the design elements in our projects. So as we see here, it's not just geometric interaction, it's interaction of the geometry with the roadway corridor in this case. Okay? It can be even defined if I modify that element. Let's just for a minute, let's watch this. Now I'm going to redefine that endpoint, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to snap that to the ground. Right? So I am using a snap, and we'll just place this against the terrain model. Now at this point, I am adjusting that vertical and going to redefine it a little bit. All right? Notice that the icon updated. Now what does that mean to my design? And now this is at the heart of design intent and rules and relationships, and how in practice you can apply it and take advantage of it. I modified that endpoint now. It had a previous rule to go to a certain elevation at a certain station and stop. Now I've defined it to simply follow the terrain. So what happens when I, again, modify the horizontal and move that around? Notice what that endpoint now is doing. It's following the ground. That is its rule. Follow the ground wherever the ground goes. All right? Now, again, that is, in practice, fundamentally, what design intent and rules and relationships are all about. Okay? It's being able to define how something is designed, what it relates to, how it relates to it. All right. We are a couple, depending on which clock you use. One final thing. Let's go here, and I want to show you one last thing. I didn't quite get to show this. I mentioned there were three main, well, really three ways that design or rules and relationships are created in Elements. We saw using OpenRoads tools to create relationships. We still have the relationship back to the baseline that we defined when we offset left and right. We have that, so we've got rules where we built a relationship here. We still have the snap rule telling that roadway intersection to be perpendicular to the main line. And then I mentioned Civil AccuDraw. How does Civil AccuDraw relate? So let's take a look at that before we finish up. All right, so I'm pulling out the Civil AccuDraw toolbar. And then just as an example again, we're going to just create what would be a right-of-way, for example. So I'm going to change the feature definition here so that we'll get a different line style. And then we will place a line. I'm going to activate Civil AccuDraw. Place a line, and we're going to use station and offset as our method. Now, basically, again, this is the explanation: is that every one of these options for locating elements builds a rule or a relationship on that element when you place it. So I'm going to build a relationship into my line based off station and offset. That's what I'm actually doing. I'm drawing the line, but I'm also building that intelligence into it. So let's place a line. I've got the station and the offset selected. You'll notice my little heads-up toolbar changes. And now I'm going to click the O button just to define what's the baseline I'm working from. All right? And so now I'm picking up the station and the offset. Now, of course, I can just graphically pick something, or I could key something in. So we'll set the station at that and the offset to minus 30, right? And I've located that first point. Now let's just create a taper going up here. We'll go to station, and let's let the offset be minus 15. All right, and then that's simple, straightforward. Notice the rules and relationships. By creating that line in that way, using Civil AccuDraw, defining the stations, defining the offset, I've now built that relationship into that element. Sometimes I've said I programmed that element the right way, or how I want it to act. With that being said, if I now move that element along the roadway, what happens to the elements that I have built with a relationship to it? So in this very simple example, we used microstation snaps in a perpendicular snap. We used the OpenRoads tools, and we used Civil AccuDraw, in addition to the OpenRoads tools, to build in that intelligence into those elements. All right, so I'm sure I have used my allotted time. So with that, we'll open it up for questions. If anybody has any thoughts or questions or comments.